Is it possible to change the port of the embedded Tomcat server in Spring Boot? Yes, we can change the default port of the embedded Tomcat server in Spring Boot. This can be done by setting the server.property in the application.properties or a YML file to be desired port number. What happens if a started dependency includes conflicting versions of libraries with other dependencies in the project? If a starter dependency includes conflicting versions of libraries with other dependencies, Spring Boot's dependency management resolves this by using a concept called dependency resolution. So it ensures that only one version of each library is included in the final application. It is prioritizing the most compatible version. This helps to prevent runtime errors caused by conflicting dependencies and ensures the smooth functioning of the application. What is the default port of Tomcat in Spring Boot? The default port for Tomcat in Spring Boot is 8080. This means when a Spring Boot application and embedded server is run, it will by default listen for HTTP requests on port that is 8080 unless it is configured otherwise. Can we disable the default web server in Spring Boot application? Yes, we can disable the default web server in Spring Boot application by setting the spring.main.web application type property to none in our application.properties or a YML file. This will result in a non-web application suitable for messaging or batch processing jobs. How to disable a specific auto configuration class? We can disable specific auto configuration class in Spring Boot by using the exclude attribute of the @enable auto configuration annotation or by setting the spring.autoconfigure.exclude property in our application.properties or a YML file. Can we create a non-web application in Spring Boot? Absolutely, we can create a web applications. So for that, Spring Boot is not limited only for a web applications. We can create a standalone or a non-web applications by disabling the web context. So this is done by setting the application type to none, which skips the setup of web specific context and configurations. Describe the flow of HTTP requests through a Spring Boot application. In Spring Boot application, HTTP's request first pass through the embedded server's security level, which manages SSL or TLS encryption. Then the requests are routed to appropriate controllers based on URL mappings. Controllers process the request, possibly invoking the services for business logic, and return the responses, which are then encrypted by the SSL or TLS layer before being sent back to the client. Explain REST controller annotation in Spring Boot. The REST controller annotation in Spring Boot is used to create RESTful web services. This annotation is a convenience annotation that combines @controller and @response body, which means that data returned by each method will be written directly into the response body as a JSON or a XML format rather than through view resolution. Difference between @controller and @REST controller. The key difference is that @controller is used to mark class as a Spring MVC controller and typically return a view. @REST controller combines @controller and @response body, indicating that all methods assume @response body by default, returning data instead of view. What is the difference between request mapping and get mapping? @request mapping is a general annotation that can be used for routing any HTTP methods like get, post, put, etc., requiring explicit specification of the method. @get mapping is a specialized version of @request mapping that is designed specifically for HTTP GET requests, making the code more readable and concise. What is the difference between Spring Boot application and @enable auto configuration annotation? The @Spring Boot annotation is a convenience annotation that combines at configuration, at enable auto configuration, and at component scan annotations. It is used to mark the main class of Spring Boot application, and it triggers auto configuration and component scanning. On the other hand, at enable auto configuration specifically enables Spring Boot's auto configuration mechanism, which attempts to automatically configure our application based on the jar dependencies. We have added it. It includes within Spring Boot application. How can you programmatically determine which profiles are currently active in a Spring Boot application? In a Spring Boot application, we can find out which profiles are active by using a tool called environment. First, we include environment in our code using @AutoVid, which automatically fills it with the right information. Then we use getActiveProfiles method of environment to get a list of all active profiles. This method gives us the names of these profiles as a simple array of strings. @AutoVid, so example @AutoVid, for that we are property is environment, en is a reference, and string active profiles equals to reference env.getActiveProfiles. Mention the difference between var and embedded containers. Traditional var deployment requires a standalone servlet container like Tomcat, Jetty, or a Wildfly. In contrast, Spring Boot with an embedded container allows us to package the application and the container as a single executable jar file. It's simplifying deployment and ensuring that the environment configurations remain consistent. What is Spring Boot Actuator? Spring Boot Actuator provides production-ready features to help and monitor and manage our application. It includes a number of built-in endpoints that provide vital operational information about the application like health, metrics, info, dump, environment, etc., which can be exposed via HTTP or JMX. How to enable actuator in Spring Boot? To enable actuator in Spring Boot, we simply add the Spring Boot starter actuator dependency to our project's build file. Once added, we can configure its endpoints and their visibility properties through application properties or a YML configuration file. How to get the list of all beans in our Spring Boot application? To list all the beans loaded in the Spring Boot application, we can inject the application context into any Spring managed bean and call the getBeanDefinition names method. This will return a string array that containing the names of all beans managed by the context.